Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES television.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there are so many moves in the city's mayoral recall process that they themselves are getting hard to recall. We know this. We are awaiting for final petition totals, and that the needed total is now lower than the previously calculated number. Is it low enough? We're still waiting. Statewide, the moves are being made for what promises to be intense elections for governor, secretary of state, and attorney general. And elsewhere, good news for eastern New Orleans. It's sometimes hard to come by, but this week, plans for a new industrial park on the Michoud site bring badly needed hope, as does an architecturally significant multiple office building sale in New Orleans. We'll look at these stories, plus the career of Bob Tucker, who played a pivotal role in the integration of city government. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Regal, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Jeremy Alford, editor and publisher, LaPolitics.com and LouisianaTracker.com, and Matt Sledge, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we stay with Matt because the latest in the recall effort of Mayor LaToya Cantrell of New Orleans. Developments just keep happening and responses just keep happening. So why don't you fill us in on what's been going on this week?
Yeah, it has been a dizzying week and a half. On Ash Wednesday, an hour before their deadline, the recall organizers hopped out of a van and raced boxes full of signature sheets into City Hall. They didn't tell us how many names they think they've collected, though. So Orleans Parish Registrar of Voter Sandra Wilson and her crew are working through all of those sheets, trying to count them, trying to see how many the recall team actually gathered. And at the same time, on the separate track, there's been this lawsuit that the recall folks filed against Wilson and Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin, arguing essentially that the bar had been set too high because election officials had included thousands of ineligible people on the parish's active voter rolls. On Wednesday, that lawsuit was settled with a deal between Ardoin and the recall organizers. Wilson was dismissed from the case, so she wasn't part of a settlement. Mm-hmm. And they came up with a deal that essentially cuts the goal for recall organizers by 5,000 signatures.
Okay, because it had been at 49,000 plus, right?
Yes.
And so now it would be 5,000 less.
Exactly.
Now, this had to be approved by the judge, right?
This had to be approved by Judge Jennifer Medley, but I think we can expect that in the days or weeks to come, this deal and other parts of the process will almost certainly be challenged in court by Mayor LaToya Cantrell and her folks, because they really don't want this thing to go to a ballot.
Okay, now we heard a response from the mayor this week who basically said she sees this recall as not really to remove her as mayor of the city of New Orleans. She sees it about disenfranchisement of voters, particularly black voters. So these maneuverings now, the agreement between Secretary of State and the recall, how does that play into that thought process?
Yeah, so it's really important to remember that the Secretary of State and the recall folks just came up with a new number. They didn't actually move anybody from the active voter list or to the inactive voter list or kick anybody off the rolls. But just this mere appearance of a kind of backroom deal in the way that one of the mayor's advisors put it is something that Cantrell and her folks are going to seize on. I think there's also a lot of confusion over the nature of this deal. They essentially came up with a number for the sake of the recall campaign alone. A lot of people have asked me, how can they do that? I'll leave that to the lawyers. But yeah, the mayor is seizing on this and in very sharp terms connected this to the city's Jim Crow history and said it was disenfranchisement.
So it's up to the registrars of each individual parish to canvass the rolls and to make sure they're kept up to date. But Michoud Ardoin, Secretary of State, wants to see that improved a bit, doesn't he?
He has called for a second supplementary canvass during the year. Governor John Bell Edwards has vetoed that. If you talk to the registrars, a lot of them will say that they're already short-staffed and kind of trying to do the best they can with the various duties that they have.
Okay, so let's talk about these signatures now, because the paper was also involved in a suit against the campaign, the recall campaign, wanting to get those numbers, and the agreement was made that when they were submitted that you all would get them. There was a delay in that. You've finally gotten them. How many are there? Do we know?
That's a great question. We're still working our way through them. It's a very laborious process, and obviously I think everybody wants to know the answer to that question, and we want to get it to folks as fast as possible. It would be great if the recall organizers would just come out and tell us how many signatures they collected, but for what they describe as strategic reasons, they haven't been doing that.
Now, they had wanted $15,000 to help with printing costs. I don't know what was arranged with that, but how did you ultimately get, in what form?
Ultimately got for $0 other than our legal costs, a thumb drive containing thousands of scanned images of petition sheets, and we didn't have to pay a dime.
So that's what you mean when you say you are working through those. Literally, you're working through these thousands of scanned things.
Yes.
And sheets.
I personally and many staffers have spent hours this week.
Any idea when you all might get through that? And give us
no.
if we're not.
I don't want to say a date because I'll be wrong.
Okay, so now let's get back to the time that the registrar has to verify the signatures that have been turned into them, the signed sheets. When is that deadline?
Her deadline is March 22nd, and having looked through many of these myself, I know that it's going to be a tough task. She has already called in the cavalry from at least 2 other registrars' office, and at the same time, the Secretary of State's office is kind of backstopping her on her normal duties. So they're calling in everybody they can to help with these things. You got to remember, this is the biggest recall that looks like it might have a chance that Louisiana has ever had.
Okay, so once we get to the 22nd, if those have been verified, we would move on to the next step, but you kind of have a feeling that there might be some legal action in between.
I think we can safely say there will probably be lawsuits. This deal between Ardoin and the recall organizers could be the focus of one of those lawsuits. If I were a lawyer for the mayor, I might be looking at how they came to this number of 25,000 people being chopped down from the goal, and whether that number was arbitrary.
Okay, well, we will see how it all plays out ultimately, but it's not going to resolve anytime soon, it would seem like. Okay, all righty, thanks a lot, Matt. Jeremy, let's go over to you now, and governor's race this year, and still the slate of candidates forming.
Yeah, I mean, we're into forum season now. It's hard to believe 8 years ago at this time, the first commercial was on the radio for the governor's race, and we haven't heard a peep, really.
Yeah.
But let's do a quick overview of who's in and who's out. On the Republican side, you have State Senator Sharon Hewitt from Slidell. You have State Representative Richard Nelson from Mandeville, Treasurer John Schroeder, and of course Attorney General Jeff Landry. Those are the 4 folks that you're seeing at the forums now, at the association forums, community forums, because they're the only announced candidates that have been invited. Moving forward, that's going to change. We're going to probably see 2 more people at these forums. One being Sean Wilson. He's the Transportation Secretary. His final day is this weekend. There are expectations he will announce as soon as Monday. He will be the first Democrat in the field. He'll have the support of Governor John Bell Edwards, and I'm sure that will extend to his fundraising apparatus as well. Hiller Moore, the district attorney from East Baton Rouge Parish, announced this week he will not run for governor. He loves the job he has, so he's going to keep it. And finally, there's independent Hunter Lundy. He's a trial attorney from the Lake Charles area. He has put $1.5 million of his own money into this race. He'll be a factor, and we'll get to him later. He has an interesting base of Pentecostals and trial lawyers funding his campaign, and he very well could get to the right of Jeff Landry. This is a guy who's part of a group that's called the National Association of Christian Lawmakers, who push for biblical legislation, and there are members who believe in a Judeo-Christian based government. So we'll see if he can get to the right of Jeff Landry. But we saw the first forums this week, one from the Louisiana Association of Oil and Gas, and one from the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. We learned that Sharon Hewitt is kind of this no-nonsense former oil and gas executive. She said on her very first day in office, she will instruct the Department of Natural Resources to pause all activities related to this coastal litigation that we have all discussed many times on this show, that's been filed by parishes, state government, and others against oil and gas companies. Jeff Landry, without a doubt, is the showman in the group. You may remember when he was in Congress during President Obama's job speech, he held up a sign that said "Drilling equals jobs." He pulled that out again this week at one of the forums. Exact same legal size paper, exact same font that he used. He wanted folks to remember, this is who I am. Most interestingly, though, Jeff Landry is starting to kind of talk to the middle. He reminded voters that he had a bipartisan voting record in Congress, coming out of Congress. He had bipartisan votes. And, he's about to travel to Mar-a-Lago to seal the endorsement from Donald Trump. He already has the endorsement for the Republican Party. So Jeff Landry has sewn up the right, and he's getting ready to talk to the middle in a very real way.
You haven't mentioned one name that's out there that we're thinking of, but he hasn't declared yet.
That is Garrett Graves. He and Jeff Landry did meet over the weekend privately. I believe the Attorney General requested this meeting. He made a push to get a concession from Garrett Graves about what he's going to do, and I don't think he got that concession. I think Garrett Graves is seriously looking at this race and could end up being a surprise candidate. There are two others that have been making the candidate forum. Treasurer John Schroeder made his first appearance. He is very much the former narcotics officer, very gruff, very tough talking. And then there's Representative Richard Nelson, who I want to just talk about briefly, who is a freshman lawmaker. He's 36 years old, and he is framing things in kind of a new way. He's saying that, look, if you cross the line over into Texas, you're suddenly you're in an average state. And that means 4 more average years on your lifespan, $33,000 more in take-home pay. He is lambasting Huey Long on the campaign trail, saying that Huey Long created this tax system that we have now, and that Huey Long created this system of patronage that we follow. And it's really a very interesting approach and a very interesting field, and we'll have to see if Garrett Graves wants to jump in it or not.
You presided over one of these. Did you see anything differently? Because when you're presiding, you're involved in everything.
So I moderated the first forum on Monday, and I'm going to be moderating another forum in April for the retailers and restaurants and NFIB. The candidates are not agreeing to go on stage together. Wow. They're not agreeing to be on stage at all. They each come up separately. They speak. They might take a couple questions from the crowd, but they're not on stage together. And, without that drama in our political theater, it's not much of a drama, is it? I'm hoping that loosens up a little bit.
Do you think it will?
I don't know.
They're really pretty firm on this?
I think there are folks in this race like Jeff Landry who could use a bit of humanizing. And I think that's why he's starting to try to message to the middle a little bit. And look, if you want to do that, go get up on stage with everybody else. That's a real quick and easy way to do it.
When do you think we will start seeing the ads? Like you said, 4 years ago we were seeing them at this time of the year.
I mean,
We've
there
seen nothing.
are videos out there. If you want to go look online, you can find some videos from the candidates that range from very serious to kind of interesting. Richard Nelson has one with dinosaurs running through the Capitol. People dressed as dinosaurs, not real dinosaurs.
No.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, it was really early during the last open race for governor. It started, but traditionally folks look at Labor Day-ish as kind of the big kickoff. But I think we'll see probably some media here pretty soon.
And election day, primary election day is in November, right?
That's right.
November? Okay. All right.
Qualifying in August.
Okie dokie. Thanks a lot.
And the
Jeremy.
primary day is on October 14th. Is that correct?
It's
The state election?
the
yes.
statewide.
In November, right?
It's in November, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
I thought the
so.
primary was in October. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so we
Primary's
got.
in October,
Well,
not
what
November.
I'm getting to is that date may also be the date of the recall election
very
in New
well
Orleans,
could be, yeah.
which will do a lot to bring voters out. So.
Yeah.
Yep, good point. All righty. Stephanie, let's go on over to you. Let's talk about some plans for Mishu.
Well, this was an exciting announcement, as you alluded to in the introduction, for New Orleans East. NASA at the Mishu Assembly Facility the other day announced plans for a 50-acre industrial and office park, over 1.3 million square feet of new facilities. And this is the first new industrial construction in the East in over 20 years. So, you know, that holds a lot of promise. There were no exact job numbers that they could provide because a lot will depend on who the tenants are for this office park, but they expect over the long haul, if it gets built out as anticipated, at least several hundred and maybe as many as 1,000. They broke ground on phase 1, which will be like the first of 3 or 4 building complex, and they do have one tenant lined up who's already going to take almost 300,000 square feet. So that's pretty significant. That tenant is Textron Systems, you know, a big publicly traded company. They have offices based on the North Shore. They already have warehouse space at Mishu in one of the older buildings out there. They're going to be moving to the new space. So I'm not really sure how much of a net win it is, but at least they have that commitment of support. And Textron is a big military contractor, so I'm sure, you know, it kind of works for everybody that they move where NASA wants them to move. But, you know, as provided that this developer, it's a group called IRG out of Los Angeles, and they're leasing the space from NASA, then they're going to go out and find the tenants, manage the property, and act as the landlord, and that's how they'll presumably make money on it. But provided that they can find the tenants, this really will be a win for the area. The flip side is, you know, when I say this is the first new industrial development in 20 years, there's a reason, right? I mean, there's just not that much demand out there, or other people would have already done this. The Hoppen office space and industrial warehouse flex space in this market is out at Elmwood. And there just hasn't been, there's been so much disinvestment in the East. And even if a tenant comes there and goes into this shiny new office park, where are their employees going to eat lunch? There's not, where are they going to go run to the grocery store, the drugstore out there? So, you know, it's not an immediately attractive area from that respect. What they're hoping is, though, with the plans for the port's new international terminal down the road in Violet, you know, that's not that far away.
Right.
So they're hoping that that will be sort of an attractive corridor. And there's a lot of interest in the tech space, aerospace.
Real quick, competing with Six Flags, isn't that part of the
Well,
plans for
that
Six
is
Flags
sort
too?
of it. Six Flags' new developer has talked about wanting to do an industrial park out there, really just down the road. I mean, a stone's throw. But look at the history of the Six Flags redevelopment. We'll still be talking about that next year on the show, and the next year on the show, and the next year on the show. So at least this thing is moving forward. You got NASA behind it. They've got a proven developer in IRG, and they have a proven tenant in Textron.
A lot of land out there, too.
A lot of
Work with
land.
A lot of land. Okay, Stephanie, thanks a lot. And let me clarify something. The primary is October 14th.
October 14th.
Yes, and then, of course, the runoff would be in
Runoff
November,
in
I think.
November.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
that might be the key date in the recall thing. So.
Right. Okay, E, over to you. This week we learned of the loss of someone who has meant so much to New Orleans government,
Yeah.
Bob Tucker.
A real transitional date in contemporary New Orleans politics was in 1969. There was a mayoral election, but it was the first election after both the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act had passed. So that was changing the nature of politics. Moon Landrieu had won that election, but Moon Landrieu had built a good and sincere following among the black community. As a legislator, sometimes he was the only one voting against segregationist legislation, and he really went out into the black community, and I think in his heart really believed in action and civil rights type action. And he publicly said, we're going to get more people in the administration, we're going to get more blacks in the administration. And when he was elected, he went into office in 1970, he had 3 young executive assistants, and one of them was Bob Tucker, who was someone he saw during the campaign. And at that time, being executive assistant to the mayor was probably the highest office in city government that a black person would have. But from the beginning, he made Bob Tucker gave a good impression, got a really tough assignment right off the bat. The Black Panthers came in town, and they went to the Desire Project, and there was a standoff one day between the police and the Black Panthers, and there were rumors that they were going to start shooting at each other. So the mayor sent Tucker to go and deal with that, and he did. He got the police to agree not to fire. He got the Black Panthers to agree to be peaceful. Ultimately, the Black Panthers left, the police left, and the whole thing was resolved. But during that time, he got involved in many, many special projects. Prior to that, even as a student, he was so esteemed that he actually worked as a park ranger for one time. When John Kennedy was president, he had established a program to get more blacks working as park rangers. And so he actually spent some time at Yosemite National Park doing that. And so he had kind of a varied career. But he was known for his early work with Landrieu. And at that time, I think everybody knew that after Landrieu was done, even if he served 2 terms, the next mayor was going to be black. And a lot of people were saying, this is the guy. Okay, it's going to be Bob Tucker because he's really a rising star. It didn't work out that way. Dutch Morial was the first black mayor. But during Tucker's career, he worked for Dutch Morial. He advised Dutch Morial. Mark Morial, Dutch's son, who was mayor, sent out a glowing response yesterday saying that in his 2 campaigns, which he won, that Bob Tucker was key, especially with young politicians and getting them in. And so he did a lot to really develop the careers of up-and-coming politicians.
Very, very important person in New Orleans politics, Bob Tucker. We wish his family, to send our sincere condolences and really respect for Bob Tucker. And that smile could light up a room. He had such a wonderful smile. Thanks a lot, Ian.
And he really was the perfect guy for this transitional figure. As the city moved from being governed more by blacks, he was the perfect guy to lead the way.
Okay, all righty, let's go on over to Jeremy now, and we're quickly running out of time in this show, so real quick. Secretary of State is another office that's going to be up for election in the fall. What's that looking like?
If you've been following politics the last 3 years, you've heard the phrase voting irregularities, and you know that it is at the core of Republican politics, and that's going to come into play in this election for Secretary of State. Kyle Ardoin has a challenger already. His name is Brandon Trosclair. He claims to be the Trump candidate. He employs a few hundred people in Louisiana and Mississippi across 13 different grocery stores. His first fundraising report has been filed. The Trump money hasn't showed up. The Trump support hasn't showed up. We'll have to wait and see. But with the recall brewing, with questions continuing about the state's voting system, the voting machines, when those are going to be purchased, when the RFP is going to go out, there's a lot on the line for Kyle Ardoin, and it looks like he's going to get a challenge from the right.
The Attorney General spot, because Landrieu's going to be leaving it.
There's 3 big players in this race. District Attorney John Belton from North Louisiana, State Representative John Stefanski, who led the redistricting efforts here recently, and then Liz Muriel, who is the Solicitor General, kind of the right-hand attorney to Attorney General Jeff Landry. He is 100% behind Liz Muriel, and she has been endorsed by the Republican Attorney General Association, which is a big get for her, especially this early in the cycle. So she's going into that race with kind of a head of steam.
Do you think any more names will be joining in entering in either field, or is it really sort of locked in now?
We'll have to wait and see. With all the uncertainty around the governor's race, I'm hesitant to lock in on anything until August, which is qualifying.
Okay, thanks a lot. Stephanie, over to you. Some really important buildings in downtown New Orleans are now up for sale.
They are up for sale. So 3 years ago, Baton Rouge developer Mike Wampold bought the former Whitney Bank headquarters, whole block pretty much of 6 buildings bounded by St. Charles Camp, Common, and Gravier, and his plans are to turn it into a hotel with some high-end condos or apartments and ground floor retail and restaurants. About 2 weeks ago, he put 3 of the buildings on that block up for sale for almost $24 million. Those buildings are not part of his plans for the hotel condo complex. So it doesn't really signal, a disruption or a change to his plans, but he had been holding them for a while. And it sort of illustrates the holding costs, which are really pricey, especially with market conditions have changed so much since he bought these buildings between inflation and interest rates. So he's trying, I think, to monetize them, make the project a little easier for him once he is able to move forward, which he says he hopes will be later this year, but who knows. The thing about these buildings is, like, Errol, I think about being downtown, and if you grew up here, these are just fabulous buildings that we all remember from the CBD, the Norman Maier building on Camp Street, beautiful Beaux-Art architecture with terracotta, ornamental terracotta, and the Barnes building, which is this fabulous, Italian Renaissance red brick type of structure. And so, the issue is who buys them, what do they do with them? Probably going to be hotels or apartments because there's just no market for office space. I mean, it's going away.
Are these buildings being used at all right now? Or they're
No,
vacant?
I think they're pretty much vacant right now, which is a shame. Now, we talked a couple of months ago about the building on Newspaper Row just down the block where Peter Mayer has had its headquarters, and it's on the market for sale also. So there's a lot of the old historic office buildings that we think of in the traditional CBD, what was the historic financial district, up for sale right now. And I think it just sort of shows the continued transition of our traditional financial district into Airbnb, short-term rental,
that's
hospitality
what I was
district.
Would this be for like condos or apartments or short-term rentals primarily?
Any of it, and it's all zoned for that because it is commercial. So, but I think you're just going to see more and more of it. I mean, look, just down you've got the Howard Avenue, Plaza Tower building, and that's going to be maybe a massive hotel hospitality development, or maybe just a continued eyesore. We'll see.
Yeah, which it's been for a very long time now.
Right.
All right, guys, time to go to other stories. E, over to you.
Well, big news here. This time of the year, the azaleas come out. And it's like that this year there was some kind of switch. Somebody pulled Mardi Gras over, bring out the azaleas, because all of a sudden they've been blooming. Saw a bunch today that, they got these beautiful shades of purple. I saw some orange ones today, which I've never seen before.
Sort of a coral color.
Yeah. But that's really a fun thing to see this time. And last year they were beautiful, and so if they follow what happened last year, it should be good.
Yeah, it seemed like mine started. I have a bunch of bushes in my backyard, and they started really even before, a little bit before Mardi Gras. They started too soon. I'd love to see
because you were in
azaleas
Metairie.
now.
They started earlier in Metairie.
That's right. Stephanie, over to you.
We have the Tulane Book Fair starting at the end of next week, so maybe y'all will be talking about this next week at this time or something, but really an impressive group of dignitaries, intellectuals, luminaries coming in for that, and this is the second year of it. It's really an impressive thing for New Orleans.
All righty. Jeremy.
We are a month and a week away from the beginning of the regular session at the Capitol, where the azaleas are in bloom. Errol. So they are. So if your business is politics and you're not following those bills, they are being filed. Go check out the legislature's website.
So when exactly is the one?
April 10th.
April 10th.
Yes.
Boy, that does come up really, really quickly.
It is.
seems.
And it's going to be a
doesn't it?
quick session.
All right. Thanks a lot. Pat.
More recall, infinite recall. Also on my radar, the RTA just picked a new permanent CEO today, and she is going to have to try to convince the City Council to sign off on this kind of early plan for bus rapid transit. There's been some controversy around the part of the route over the Crescent City connection, but this would also be a big win for transit folks if it goes forward.
All righty, guys. Well, thanks a lot for being here around the table with us, and thank you all for joining us, too. We will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
With a continued passion for public television, we are proud to underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES Television.